Good morning, everyone. Apparently, I thought last Monday was the 17th for reasons. So today is the 17th. So let's fix that problem before we get too far down this road. Oh, let's set up music. I'm feeling loungy. An ordinate number of cat hairs. You want to play right? All right. Hang on real quick. All right. Excellent. So I want to make sure that my buddy Jackie is going to be there because she and I play a game called Star Trek Attack Wing Alliance. And it is a tiny spaceships game. And I am particularly fond of tiny spaceships, so there's that. All right, let's sketch this idea out. We talked about this idea last night online, and I'm not even sure exactly how I want to pull it off, but I'm going to think it out. I'm going to think it out the old-fashioned way here. Oh, yes, that way. All these things here, but none of them are the pencil. Just a normal Joe Blow pencil, right? Oh, that's a pretty decent pencil, I think. Yeah. Okay, where's that? I feel like the normal pencil is not a big deal, pencil. Move it to the top. And I feel like the pencil is what I just usually use just to sketch out ideas because it looks like a pencil, Oh, you know what I should do? Because I'm not quite awake yet. I'm going to find my perfect color. Where's my perfect color? Tell it to be always my perfect color. All my main tools. Perfect color. Somewhere I have a picture of my perfect color. taped it. Wait a minute. Sneeze. Oh, that's my perfect color right there. Right? Perfect shade of blue. Never gets any more perfect than this. This is the perfect shade of blue. Right here. Perfect shade. Right? Does it? Oh, it is. Right? There. Oh, I need to do that one. Okay. Why doesn't that look the same? Because it doesn't. It doesn't look the same as this, does it? It doesn't really look the same as that. It really doesn't. That looks a different color. I feel like that's not the same. So what we're going to do is this. Hang on. Moment. Bill wants to try that. Let's get Bill in here. I'm going to open up the doohickey. And link. That doohickey. Ha! Look at me controlling stuff. There we go. Beloved Bill, join us. While I try to figure out why this color doesn't look right. Right? This looks ish. Right? Bill's joining. Bill has joined.
Hello.
Hello, Bill.
What are you up to this morning?
So far trying to figure out why this color of blue is not the shade of blue that I want it to be. As is could only happen in my world. Why is this blue not the blue I want?
Seems like a presidential blue.
Yeah, it's I feel like it's lighter than this. Like, I feel like it's supposed to be. I mean, looking over here. So, have I told you the story of this chair?
No.
Because that's the color I feel like it should be. Good morning, Jerry. So, okay, this was my great grandmother's vanity chair or something. It was like at her little vanity when she was a girl. So we're talking. This chair comes from around the turn of the 19th century or 20th century. Turn of the 20th century, right? Turn of the 1900s. My sister has been carrying it with her all over the place. She takes it all over the place. So when she moved from Germany back to the US, she had the US Army moving her, right? The Army movers. And they just crushed this thing. They put it underneath something, and something heavy, and what she got back was effectively splinters, right? I mean, not really, but it was crushed. So she was totally devastated. She'd been carrying it around with her for years. You know, it was our great grandmother's. It was a family heirloom. My dad said, "I think I can fix it." And Gia was like, "Dad, I don't think there's anything we can do with it. It is gone." And so he took it. But my dad was a picture framer. That's what he used to do, right? So he had a lot of woodworking tools just for making pictures. But he was really handy. So he managed to put it all back together again. I mean, we don't think it'll hold anything more than a cat. So, but what he did was of course, the fabric over it had been, you know, it had vanished over the years. You know, the fabric had faded, of course, on the seat. So he got this fabric from his storage somewhere, which was this. They call it ultra suede. And ultra suede is I don't even know if we still use it anymore because it's probably some kind of horrible synthetic. But my grandmother she had a fabric shop, and so this was her big selling thing in the 70s and 80s was ultra suede. Everybody came in to get ultra suede. So when she closed her shop in the 90s, Dad took all the extra bolts of ultra suede and, you know, any other good worthwhile fabrics from the shop, and he wrapped them up in shrink wrap, because my dad shrink wrapped everything, and put them in his storage unit. Well, apparently he still had some, so he figured when he fixed this, he'll put the ultra suede around the seat. And he picked this blue. When I went to see my sister, something about this blue was so super incredible to me. Like, it was the best thing I had ever seen. And my sister and I talked about it. And what we think happened was the ultra suede has a very, very smooth feel. It almost feels like, I mean, it's got like almost a rubbery feel to it. Not quite, but, you know, it's got a little bit of a bounce sort of thing. But it's not furry, but it's not furry. It's very hard to explain. Ultra suede is the weirdest stuff, but I love the feel of it. And what we theorize is little me, you know, 2-year-old me or whatever, grew up in the fabric shop. And it is entirely plausible that in the fabric shop, as you know, because all of us ADDers, we have tactile things where things feel funny or feel really, they either feel nice or they feel really weird, and there's no explanation. I have always loved the feel of ultra suede. It reminds me of home, sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like, and we think that this is what imprinted my favorite color, this shade of blue, and we think it was this bolt of fabric. We think it was legitimately this bolt of fabric because Nana didn't sell a lot of it because it was super expensive. And so it is entirely plausible that the same bolt of fabric stayed in her shop until the day she closed it. And when she did, Dad wrapped it up and stuck it in the storage unit, you know, not thinking anything of it. And then later, whenever he rebuilt this, wrapped the seat around it, because I had a really wild reaction to this. Like, it was super visceral, just to the color of the seat. It was this really visceral reaction to it. I was like, Gia, where did this come from? And Dad wrapped it with some ultra suede that he'd gotten from Nana's shop. And I was like, I think there's something more going on here. So I took a picture of it to capture the color. And of course that's more what it should be. It's not, but that was what it was. So anyway, that's the story of this ultra suede. Is this. So this is the perfect color.
I sent you a couple links of sites you can upload an image to, and they'll give you the average color. So So instead of trying to hunt down
The right color?
the color, you could just maybe one of those. You can like highlight a section or something.
Well, maybe that would be more useful than what I'm doing right now, because you're right. What I'm doing right now is poking around. I like your plan better.
The second link might be more advanced. I'm not sure.
Let's see what it says. Yeah, it's average coloring the entire picture.
Yeah, so you might need to send just like a section that you want.
Yeah. Wow, 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 wow. Oh, man. Yeah, effectively porn music going here. Wow, 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 wow. I say that. I really don't know what porn music's like. So, I mean, I guess I'm guessing because of what everybody always says about porn music, but that's okay. I'm gonna pretend like this. Yeah. This. So, how are you this morning?
I'm okay.
That's good.
I just woke up, so
Yep. That's what Jerry was saying. Yay for, right? With just one upgrade, that Ultra Suede could have been Mega Suede. And you know what happens when Mega Suede gets the atmosphere from planets? Maybe not. Gone from suck to blow. It's a ridiculously funny movie. Probably more funny than it needs to be. Copy. Paste. Big. This will work. I'll just do it this way. There. Save as. I find this particularly funny. There was an anime back in the day. I can't remember if it was an anime or a French movie. There was something that was called Perfect Blue. And so I like calling this Perfect Blue because I think that the movie was creepy. In my head, the movie is super creepy. There we go. Yep, that's it. That was easy. There we go. Thank you, my friend. Like, hey, I know what you want. All right, Perfect Blue. Mom watched some weird movies when I was younger. So, like, sometimes I would be like, I don't know what this is about. So, I think I will probably just call this Guys. my perfect blue right there. It's my perfect color.
I don't know if it'll include that in your average though.
The average looked right.
Oh, okay. Oh, you did it already, and I missed it.
Yeah, I used your app for that. So
I'm trying to do with this website that has like this ad blocker thing,
and
I'm like, I turned it off. Why do you keep popping it up?
oh yeah, I've got lots of blockers on that site too, or not from that site necessarily, but. Right? Today's messages from Bill help find the perfect shade of blue.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because blue has always been my favorite color, but I knew that there was a specific shade that just resonates with me. Like, it's like fire, it's just like it's so totally, it's the best color, And I think it's even cooler that we managed to, by complete accident, figure it out. My sister and I just happened across it. And you just helped me find it. Thank you.
Sweet.
Gesundheit. Or, as I am starting to say now, I have observed that you sneezed.
Oh, it was a cough.
I have observed that you coughed. Because I'm still not sure in the modern era why we must observe that the other person has sneezed. But apparently we do.
Because back in the day, any little thing could kill you. So if you sneeze, it was like, oh my God. Blessings upon you.
Which I totally get, except it's not back in the day. Which is the thing that hits me every time. I'm like, well, it's not back in the day.
Well, in medieval times at least, right?
Yeah, I know, but we still say bless you or gesundheit, and if you don't say anything, you feel really awkward, like you should say something.
Right.
So now I'm like, I don't know. Why are we doing this? Because I get it. Back in the day, if you were sneezing, you were probably coming down with the latest strain of kill you quickly ness. And so it was, but God bless you so that you stay alive. I get that, but it's 2023. It's not necessarily indicative of that. In fact, it could just be hay fever. 99% of the time, it's hay fever.
I think some cultural things stick. Like, there's a lot of stuff. Like, have you ever seen the hidden history of American slang?
Yes.
Like, a lot of it is old stuff, but it just keeps carrying forward. We just, find new uses for it or whatever.
Right?
Like I remember the term highfalutin.
Uh-huh.
You were highfalutin because back in the day on the Mississippi, you had your ferries that would go back and forth, and on the top, they had the big smokestacks, the flutes. So if you were wealthy, you got to ride up the top, but if you were poor, you rode down near the bottom.
Right.
So if someone called you highfalutin, you were someone wealthy that rode on the top.
That's fair.
And we don't ride on those things anymore, but the term still floats around.
Yeah. That makes sense. Interesting, too.
Yeah.
George is really into this today. You know what? Hey, so are you willing to give me just a second here? I'm going to go downstairs and put more ice in my coffee.
Sure. I'll give you a second if you give me a second afterwards. I need to go get food.
Oh, why don't you go get food and I'll put us on the I'll put us on the rotation of pictures, and then Jerry can hold down the fort. Jerry, you're holding down the fort. Then we'll be back in just a second.
Don't change that. Don't touch that dial.
Don't touch that dial. Hi, I'm going downstairs. You've come up here, and you know, I'm just saying that. Oh, I don't have that anymore. Never mind. You could just watch George. George, hold down the fort.
I'll be right back.
What is George doing? Interruptions with Pepper. How are you doing? This is Interruptions with Pepper. As you can see, I have Pepper. It's not on the show yet. Alright. Well, George is now gone. Good morning, Max. So, alright.
Hey, Pepper.
Hey, Guy.
Did Bill make you hold down the fort because we decided to leave?
No, this is Interruptions with Pepper.
Oh, Interruptions with Pepper? Except you're not interrupting us.
There's from Bill, but there's interruptions from Pepper.
Oh, you're not interrupting us, though. We love you.
Well, when Bill goes on the show, it's Interruptions with Pepper.
We've turned it around and gone the other direction now. I see.
Yep.
How are we doing today?
As you can see, I have bedhead.
Yep. It's all good. As you can see, my pencil does not want to work. Why is my pencil not working? That's the story. Are we set for, like, selecting something somewhere? I just don't know it.
I don't know.
No? Weird.
Quick question. Are you a friend of Nathan Hamill?
Not a friend, just familiar. Like, I've met him a handful of times. He was in Red Team Go before I was. And he left for reasons that I'm not. It was. So anytime.
That whole situation is. I'm not getting into that.
I'm just saying that anytime it's. I'm mad at these people because of X, Y, or Z, and the other people say I'm mad at these people because of A, B, or C. I tend to forget the X, Y, or Z and the A, B, and C. I just know that there is stress between the Red Team Go guys and Nathan, and I don't know what because I wasn't involved. So
I wasn't involved either, and I've had like numerous tellings of what actually happened and what occurred.
And you've forgotten them all, just like me.
No, like I didn't commit. I stopped committing them to memory. So
yeah, I mean it's not worth it. I don't know him, and I don't know. I mean, he's probably just a nice guy.
Well, no, I was bringing him up because he has an artist show now called Behind the Glass Podcast.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
And
you also were not involved, Jerry says.
Yeah. I mean, most people weren't involved. It was like, I think it actually only involved like maybe 3 people at most. Yeah, George, you probably were bird watching when it happened because most everyone was bird watching when it happened.
Being George, he was holding them. That's what he was doing.
Exactly.
Switch to.
No, he has a podcast, and I wasn't sure. Like, if I should approach him about alone or basically promoting Quasar Art Collective instead. So having all of us on the show. But I don't know if Cayen is.
I don't think Cayen
I don't
think Cayen was involved
with
either.
him.
I feel like Cayen and I were after that era, but Colton might be. So, good morning, Brent.
Good morning,
So it's
Brent.
plausible that Colton might be. So, because Colton does predate me in Red Team Go, but there's stress between Colton and like the rest of the Red Team Go people too. So, and I can't remember what that was all about either. Except one thing. The only
I really care
about that one is money was involved, and that's why you and I may work together, but I'm never ever going to give you money, or you're never going to give me money. That's my rule. Because I watched it like tear Red Team Go apart because money was involved. And I'm like, you know what? In my life, what I have learned is as soon as money gets involved, all of us start yelling at each other, and I'm not interested. I will take.
Honestly, I think you're right. Like, honestly, like, no, artists and money management with artists.
It's because we're bad at it, and not only are we bad at it, but we need it badly because a lot of us are struggling, and so screwing up money is a major crime. So anytime any perception of money getting messed up happens, it's a big deal. Well, yes, but you're buying a service, and the service you are buying is more.
Okay, let's back up here. Okay, so basically what Guy is talking about is when artists go into a collective group and they start publishing collectively as a group, and that money now has to be split among not just one person, but probably multiple, up to 5 people,
right? And,
or more, or more.
As an example, Quack decides to make comic books, and we're going to make the Quack Publishing Company, and now Pepper is expected to put $50 a month in, and I'm expected to put $50 a month in because it's $100 to do it. Then Pepper puts in his $50. It turns out to be $125 for all of the fees. I fork out the other $25, get mad at Pepper because he didn't do his share, but I didn't tell Pepper. So whatever is the deal, Pepper doesn't know. So all of a sudden I'm mad at Pepper, and then the next time he pays $50 and I don't give him his comics because I'm mad at him for, that kind of crap starts happening. That's the weirdest, bizarrest stuff, and it always goes down like that.
I've seen it in other communities.
Yep.
Don't get me wrong. Like, this isn't like unique to artists, but it just particularly gets worse with artists.
Right. And it's not Pepper sells me his comic. That's fine. I mean, that never goes down wrong because that's a function, right? He gives me a comic, I give him $10. This is the way it works. Right. Jerry gives me $10, I give him a comic. This is the way it works.
Yeah.
And like what you're talking about now, Jerry, is you're putting in $10 a month so that we can expand Quack. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
You're paying $10. We're putting more administrators into Quack so that now Quack can run all the time. So you'll have a daily show instead of having missing shows. And this will pay for us to get together and do all the things because now we can actually pre-record shows, which is another thing that this next layer up does. So we can pre-record and start shows without us being here. But I mean but that's a different thing. What bothers me is it seems to happen every time. And I've heard Colton's side and I've heard the other RTG guys' side. And they both sound totally logical. And so
they do.
And so it's one of those, I don't know who's wrong. And so I'm not going to bother. And so I have already told all the parties involved, I'm neutral. My money was not involved.
The only reason I was bringing Nathan up is because of his new podcast. They don't really have a big following. And I wasn't sure if you wanted me to approach it as more of like a Quasar Art Collective where we all go on the show and he normally has someone.
I'm Switzerland.
he has people go on the show and then they draw things.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my thought is, I don't have a problem with it, but we should probably in the Quack directory, in the Quack folder, or the Quack sub, whatever is our private chat, the one that we've got on Facebook where we all talk together privately.
Yeah,
You should breach the subject and ask if Colton has a problem with it specifically.
right. And I know Raph doesn't follow that chat, so I'd have to ask him separately.
Yeah. I mean, who's in that chat?
Raph is in there, but I don't think he follows anything in there.
No, but Raph's another good one. If Raph's got a problem with Nathan too, then I don't
know if it's a problem with Nathan or the fact that
you, Raph, I'm looking at you.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a problem with. I don't know if it's a problem that he has with. That I don't know if he's actually from that he has a problem with.
He does predate me though.
Yeah, and Christina and Raph were in Red Team Go before a lot of other people that I still associate with. So
Raph drafted me into Red Team Go. I met Raph at the DVD shop. There used to be a DVD place right up here, and he was working the counter. And I came in and just started talking to him because Raph's an extrovert and I'm an extrovert. So naturally, we just started talking randomly, which my wife always still does. How do you do that? No, I don't know. So I started talking to Raph and he started talking to me and we were like, hey, we're both artists. Kick butt. And then he, after about like 30 minutes, he's like, have you ever heard of this thing called Red Team Go? And I'm like, no. He's like, you should join it. And so I was like, okay. So I joined it and then Joe Becker was there. And I was like, Joe, you're here? Because he and I went to college together. And so he's like,
yeah, Joe's now down in Colorado. Yeah, Joe's now down in Colorado Springs.
Becker?
Yeah, Becker is down in the Springs.
He shows up at the cons every so often.
Yeah. So Phil wants his seat back. So I guess this ends the interruptions with Pepper.
Yeah, but you can also join us later if you want.
Well, I'm getting my glasses, and I'm going back upstairs to eat my meal.
Okay.
No one needs to see.
As you will.
And no one needs to see me eat, so I'm not going to share my screen. Okay. Or my camera.
Besides, you're wearing a Colorado Springs Comic-Con shirt, so all it's going to do is make me go, oh crap, I need to sign up for that somewhere along the line.
Right.
You can,
is the same company still running that?
I don't know.
Oh, I turned the camera off.
Yes, the same company is running it, and it just means that he needs to help me table at NDK this year if you still have tables available.
Artist Alley opens up February 1st. I just posted on my page. Make sure when you do it though, Pepper, make sure you highlight things that look Japanese. Your Japanese style, Japanese anything. Pictures that have sakura petals. Just highlight things that are Japanese.
Okay.
So there, I've helped you.
Can I do Japanese oni?
Oni, that's perfect. Actually, that would be very perfect. Doing a whole bunch of oni would be perfect. Okay, now I don't know why my pencil's not working, but it doesn't do anything. The pencil, it does nothing. Okay, the stabilizer's on. Brush size is on, but it's not putting anything down. That makes me annoyed. I have better things to do with my life, so I will go back to my pencils over here and grab the other pencil. You go, you know what kind of trouble you'd cause if you were... that'd be funny. Okay, do you work? Yes, you work. Good. Oh, look at that. Even looks like a pencil. All right. much pencil. And that's right. All right. Got it. So, we did that. Now I am setting up the settings so it's got a background color of the perfect blue. And you also need a background color of the perfect blue.
So do all you members need to pay into NDK? Is that what you all were talking about?
Do what? One more time?
You and Pepper, you were talking about like having to give money to something?
Oh, no, we were talking about how friendships like Quack go down in flames.
Oh.
And they go down in flames as soon as one of these collectives like ours starts deciding to become a publishing company. Then money gets involved. And as soon as money gets involved, we start yelling at each other.
Right.
Because it becomes one of those things where apparently we just can't handle it anymore. And maybe hang on real quick. I'm trying to but so that's what we were talking about was as soon as money gets involved, it just for some reason just has to set fire to itself.
I think that only works out when it's extremely wealthy people.
Yeah.
Where the amount of money being given doesn't matter to them.
Well, and that's what we were saying, because artists are generally bad at maintaining their own money, and usually scraping the very bottom all the time. Any mistake with money is instantly stressful, super stressful.
Right.
That's what I was saying to him. I was like, as an example, let's say he and I decide we're going to publish a comic. It costs $100 to publish the comic. He gives me $50 and I put in $50. Then it turns out that with taxes and title and license and blah, 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 it's really $125. Well, I don't tell him. And instead I just pay the $125 and then get resentful because I'm paying now $75 and he's paying $50. But since I didn't tell him, he doesn't fix the problem. Or, I tell him and he doesn't have anything but $50. So then I get stressed out about that. Or, you know what I mean? Like, no matter what happens, it ends up always going crappy. It's okay if Pepper prints his own comics and then gives me like 50 of them to distribute with my comics into comic stores. That works fine. But as soon as we run print runs together, that's when things start getting ugly. So that's what we were talking about, was that's when nope. Just can't. We can't do it. So that's what, that was the whole discussion was about that, because of course the problem is that it always seems to go down with somebody trying really hard to get this sort of thing happening. Because he was talking about somebody from Red Team Go is doing a podcast, but they have not been part of Red Team Go since before I joined. The show wouldn't let you in last night. That's weird. We love you. There's no reason it shouldn't let you in. Hi there, Donald. Bill, we've forgotten how to block Donald this morning. I mean, what? Sorry, Donald. It's a good thing you actually do know we love you.
I also find it humorous because artists also are notorious for undervaluing their own work.
Yeah.
So.
And we're really bad at all of that, and it never goes as well as we want it to, and we're just horrible, and it's a terrible thing. So anyway, we're terrible at valuing our. We're just, and it's I blame society a lot for it because of course society also is terrible about valuing our work.
Mm-hmm.
And so we grow up thinking that what we're doing is a hobby and not valuable, even though we literally put hundreds, if not thousands, of hours into this, you know. And so, anyway, and you know how this goes. I can get on a tirade on this one quick.
I always stick to the math. It's always 3.5 times whatever it costs me to make it. Doesn't matter what I think it's worth. That's what I need to charge.
I like that actually.
Mhm.
That's a good math thing. I dig it.
Mhm.
3.5 times whatever. So
Because at 3.5 times, you covered the cost of what it costs to print it and produce it and make
Yeah.
it. You covered the cost to make the next one, and you have a certain amount to pay yourself.
Jerry's like, it was me. I blocked Donald. Sorry, we're going on about who blocked Donald because of course nobody really did, but that's funny. Yeah, that actually is not. That's not a bad plan there.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's sustainable. My biggest problem is that I don't mind the argument that I mean, because both Pepper and Brent really get like cranky with me whenever I start having issues with the pricing
Mm-hmm.
because it's the they don't undervalue yourself. Well, that's fine, but my biggest problem is if I price them at say like $15 an issue and nobody buys it, it doesn't matter whether
Mhm.
I'm valuing it or not. It's and that's the biggest issue I have is at $15, which would be three times what 15, 16, 17.50. 17.50 is your value number, right? Because I think $5 an issue is the appropriate amount, and nobody thinks that that's a good amount. Okay, that's okay. But at 3.5, that puts it at 17.50 an issue, and it's like I don't think anybody would pay 17.50 for 32 pages of comic. So
the question is, how much did it cost to print it?
Oh, you're saying that because it's
divided.
That makes sense. So take that. I think he was charging like $2 something. I don't remember. I have to go look at the receipts. That makes a little bit more sense because then that puts it at about $7.50, which is what I was actually originally going for. And then I round up to $10 because everybody has a $10 bill. Right. And nobody has $7.50, but
that's perfect. $10.
Yeah, and so it ends up being $10, which I feel still is a little steep, but everybody seems okay with paying. So I'm gonna just adjust my brain to it, and I'll be fine.
Yeah. And then what you can do is $7.50 can be your like when you sell to a store or something like that when they're buying in bulk.
Yeah. And that makes it what you're talking about. Enough to pay for one or another, enough to pay for it plus one more for the next issue. Right. Donald saying he didn't find the price he paid, and I'm Donald, I still feel bad about that man. I'm like, I don't want to take your money, Donald. But we're all suffering, and I don't know why I keep doing that too, because like nobody's doing well. Some people are doing well, but artists don't do well. We never do well. It's just the nature of the beast with us. I should make these like this. It's springs. This should be like super Serenian or Eames or Burke. Now I'm just spitting out names. People are like, what? Oh, did I tell you that I have a Burke 116? So it's right over here. You can't see it. It's off screen, but it's a legit Burke 116 chair. Those are the ones that were in the galley and stuff like that in the original series.
Hmm.
So not the bridge chairs. The bridge chairs were Burke 117s, and they didn't have arms, and the 116s have arms.
Hmm.
And I was at the Brass Armadillo one day, and there were 3, honest to goodness, Burke 116s, and I'm like, dude, I need those. And they were $50 each, so I paid $150, and I got 3, honest to goodness, real Star Trek chairs, like original Burke 116s, and it's like my favorite thing ever. I love my Burke 116s. So my buddy and I painted the helicopter bases black, and we painted the shells baby blue like they are on the show. And then Mariah made little pads, and so we put the little pads in, the black pads. So they're perfect. They're perfect little Star Trek chairs. Make me so happy. I'm glad it brings you joy, my friend. I'm glad it brings you joy.
I always laugh how in the Star Trek series how they will reuse furniture and sets.
Yep. Yep. Well, not only that, like what those reused things are is always funny.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, that is strange. I think, well, I mean, really, honestly, Jerry, I feel like I consider Restream to be somewhat of a miracle in and of itself, because it is conglomerating. I mean, you're coming in on my Twitch channel, as is Brent, and Donald's coming in on my Facebook page. You know what I mean? Like, and we have somebody out there on Cayen's channel. So, like, I consider this just a freaking miracle that it works at all.
I think the worst offender of reusing set stuff, though, is Star Trek Enterprise.
Oh, yeah?
They reuse the chairs in, like, so many places, and, like, so many random planets have the same damn chair.
Right? We're all just going to keep using the same chair. Yes. Dang it. That's not the way that works. Yeah, Star Trek is notorious for that.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of those best things about Star Trek, was seeing. I mean, they don't do it anymore because now they've got these phenomenal budgets, but back then, man, that was classic. That was the classic stuff.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about our conversation last night in Star Trek.
Uh-huh.
In Star Trek, they do that a lot. It's a common storyline to have our only option is to be aggressive or blah. And then, the captain comes in and is like, no, there's a third option. We can. And you have to realize the monster is just protecting its eggs, and you can't mind the eggs. Don't do that.
Right. Well, and, on the way home, Mariah was like, well, what were you talking about? And so I explained it to her, and she was like, well, I don't know if I necessarily agree. So she added a whole bunch of color to it too. That was fascinating. Mm-hmm. And I think in the end, because her argument was, now wait a minute, why, because she, of course, the thing is that by default, this is what's so fascinating. By default, People who tend to be right-leaning tend to automatically distrust the government.
Mhm.
Left-leaning automatically distrust companies. So
Mhm.
her thing was, okay, but what's to prevent Coca-Cola, let's say, from just trashing everything and then leaving it to the state to clean up?
Mhm.
That's her thing. She's like, because they're not going to listen to you. You can't shame them. They're not going to shame. They're just going to keep going because they don't care. As long as they're getting their money, nobody cares. So, that was a fascinating counterpoint. So my thought was something sort of in between. When you move into a city, the city gives you the contract. Here is your contract with the city. You're expected to fulfill these duties somehow. We'll help you. You can ask us to help. We'll help you figure it out. But in the end, you're supposed to do it. And one of them is, you can't abuse the workers that come from our city because our city likes our workers. So you must pay at least the fair wage. And the fair wage is established by the city at this rate, whatever rate that is. Because it would be established by different locations, right? Like Denver's fair wage would be higher than, say, Sterling, because Sterling doesn't have as high a fair. So whatever fair wage is, that's an X, but you must pay at least that. And then
I hesitate on that because government is always slow to act. So fair wage could be set, and then years could pass, and fair wage could be not fair, but it's on the contract. We don't have to pay more. You told us
that's the
to
thing.
pay this.
It doesn't. The contract doesn't say fair wage is $7 an hour. What the contract says is you must pay fair wage, and then you go to the city and say, "What's fair wage this year?" And the city says, "Oh, fair wage this year is $7." And each municipality would have a different fair wage based on their value, and it would be reevaluated every year.
Right.
So with the budget, so here's the budget. Oh, here's the economy. Okay, fair wage is going to have to go up 20 cents, let's say. So then they change it, and immediately every business now has to pay attention because their fair wage just went up. But
it's quite similar to
you'd have members of the community, the community who would the business communities who would be like going, okay, but we didn't actually make that much more money, so can you not raise fair wage because it's gonna hurt us? So there'd be like that discussion in the. But I like the idea of the granularness being at the community level around that.
So back before property taxes were much of a thing, or sales tax was too heavy, what used to happen is Coca-Cola would come in and they'd say, "Hey, we want to build a plant here." And so the city would say, "Okay, well, that's fine, but if you're going to build here, you need to expand this road and pave and maintain it. You need to pay for this infrastructure thing over here so that we can accommodate this, that, and the other thing." And that would be how the company contributes to the city in which it resides. They didn't pay property tax or anything. They just paid for stuff.
Yeah.
Or it could be like, okay, well, then you need to expand our schools so that we can provide good workers, things like that.
Right, but I mean,
and then it would almost be like a lease. Like you do that, and then you would be good for 10 years, and then we would revisit it in 10 years, and you might need to improve some other things.
Yeah, my thought was more along the lines of thinking about this from a different point of view. We all had to work together to build a dome because most of the worlds in Bellatrix Rising are not oxygen nitrogen. It's one of the reasons why Moment in the story that we're writing is so important, is because it's one of the few oxygen nitrogen planets. We all had to work together to build a dome, and now we want these businesses to do stuff in the dome. So what we'll do is we'll give them a spot in the dome, but you've got to promise to take care of the dome, take care of the environment in the dome, and take care of all of your other people. That was what Mariah was saying. She was like, the world will be different. The viewpoint will be different, which is, all of us, you can't just have somebody who's pumping out something that's caustic that'll eat through the dome, because then we'll all die. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like in a year, there will be a hole in the dome and all of our atmosphere will leak out into the planet, and then we will all suffocate to death. So you have to promise as a business that you will take care of the environment by default. That's part of signing the contract to become a business. And in return, we give you a spot in the dome. And so sort of the same thing. And I would assume and that's part of the pseudo meritocracy part, though, that I'm still working on the details of. Because like it's that Amish effect of we all just build the school. But on the other hand, there are two things that change this from not working in the current situation. One, one of the races had invented replicators a long time ago. So building a house is not as hard.
Right.
You know what I mean? You go over to the industrial replicator, which is right over there, and hooked to the outside of the dome, so it just sucks in the outside atmosphere and reconstructs all the atoms into a wall of a building. So the only thing you need to do to build, let's say I want to build yours and Pepper's house, you, me, and Bill, or you, me, and Pepper, and we'll just grab Mariah, and the four of us will go over to the industrial replicator and build some walls and use the industrial glue and glue it together, and poof, you've got a house. So it's not as complicated or difficult as doing one now. So that's easy, and food isn't a problem. So if you don't want to work at all, you can just sit over there in the corner and eat food all day if you want to. But that's kind of not the way we do these things, so you probably don't want to. I also believe that by default, humans like to work. Like they'll get bored after a while. And in fact, I'm reading a book called Humankind. Did I tell you about this?
No.
Okay, there's a book out there called Humankind, and it's by this guy, and his entire theory is, and this whole book is based on it, is that people by default are good. That we all work together by default. It's society that keeps having a negative bias, that keeps bringing up all the mass murderers and things like that. So we assume that everybody's a mass murderer, but that's not logical, because the proof over and over and over does not pan out. And one of the things that he was talking about, and he's been talking about this in this chapter, is Easter Island. Because Easter Island was discovered in the 1700s by this one guy who went there and found them and stuff like that. And there was a whole bunch of people on there living their lives and stuff like that. And they had put these Maui up, these huge statues of people, and all of this stuff. And what he has found out was, over time, he's discovered that there was a serious number of biases by the anthropologists. And as the anthropologists have revised their techniques on learning how cultures work, they've discovered their own biases. And one of them was that they assumed that the Maui were gods. They assumed that because of colonialism, that the only people who put the Maui up were slaves, right? So they assumed that there was a leader who enslaved most of the people, tore down all of the trees, and built these Maui in his likeness. But that wasn't what the villagers were saying. That was just what the anthropologists were assuming, because that was similar to colonial world. And now, going back through what the original people who landed on the island, their reports, things like that, anthropologists have found out that a lot of stuff was just like, well, we don't understand what this means, so we're going to ignore it. And so they just ignored entire sections of reports coming from these ships that kept landing. And it turns out that for the most part, the Maori were built because life on the island was pretty much perfect, and they didn't have anything to do. And so they ran out of stuff to do, so they all started building Maui. Or Moai. Moai, I think is what those are called, not Maui. Moai. Maui is the guy from Moana, right? So they started building these Moai because they had nothing better to do. They had all the food they could ever imagine. They had all of the it didn't take much to feed the entire village. They were saying since they were probably Polynesian, they were definitely Polynesian. Genetic testing shows that they were Polynesian, so they were from Polynesia, and they can tell the branch split. You're welcome. The branch split at 1100, so they arrived on Easter Island around about 1100, and by 1700, there's only a maximum of about 2,500 people that could be there, because there's only so much before industrialization. There's only so fast that we can grow as humans. You need medical, high level medical to keep the women from dying during childbirth. So until that medical stuff comes into play, we can only expect like a 5% growth rate or something like that. So anyway, so the maximum that were there were 2,500 people. Well, 2,500 people, they had the original recording showed that they all had a very equitarian society. There was no male leader or female leader. They just picked a leader every so often to be the person who sort of told people what to do. They ate they had an unlimited amount of fruits, and they had a farming going on, and they were fishing, and they were perfectly happy people, and everything was fine. And it turns out that the reason there are no people on Easter Island was because of disease. These colonists brought smallpox and wiped them out. And so the ships from England wiped them out with smallpox, and so they died of disease. But the records were going through this whole thing, and over the years they said that there was this war between one side of the island and the other side of the island, and they killed each other off over the Moai. And after going through this, they found out that was one specific ship captain in 1911 that made that assumption because he couldn't understand what they were saying. There were no translators. So he just listened to their gesticulations. But after they went through 467 skeletons that they went through on the island, they could not find evidence of any weapon being used on them. So they all died of natural causes, no weapons at all. And there was, in the 1911 log, the guy was talking about this area where a huge massacre occurred. So the scientists have gone out to this area, and they've found burned things. So they sent them back, but none of them were human bones. And all of them radiocarbon date to all over the place, all the way back from 1100 to present. So they think this was like a place where everybody just had a bonfire all the time. I mean, like, it turns out all of these assumptions and the history of this entire thing was made based solely on the assumption of this one guy's log because it fit the narrative better.
Right.
The 1911 ship fit the narrative better than the 1750 ship did. The 1750 ship didn't make any sense because they were all happy and they shouldn't be. Right? So the 1911 fit better because this guy gesticulating made it look like that they killed each other. And it's funny because he's like, every time I have found a story where historically we wiped each other out in primitive time, because his argument is it's agriculture. Agriculture is what brought war to us effectively. Because his thing was, without agriculture, there's no proof of humans killing each other. There was a whole bunch of proof, but when they go back and redo the evidence, relook at the evidence, and don't trust the 1800s anthropologists, but rather use and apply 21st century anthropology science to it, once they do, they find out that all the damage to the skeletons of the Australopithecus, of the early hominids, is all from animals. Bears, eagles, things like that. None of them are weapon damage from human weapons. So his theory is, and he's putting this forward, that humans only start warring with one another when they start drawing lines in the sand and saying, "This is my land." At that moment, they start warring with one another. And that was what his theory is.
I don't know if it's necessarily land, but certainly resources, right? That's the only reason you would draw a line in the sand, anyways, is because there's a particular resource you're looking for.
It's resource. Well, yes, I think he's simplifying it to say drawing a line in the sand and saying this is my land. Right. Because what he's saying is that prior to agriculture, there's no evidence of us fighting each other. After agriculture, there's evidence of fighting all over the place.
Right. I think that's also that feels to me like a bias on his part too, because we can see that primates war all the time.
That's what he was saying, though. I mean,
they don't have agriculture.
Well, what he was saying was, well, okay, so you haven't heard all of the story. I've been telling this story on here a couple of times. His theory is cooperation was what made us live through the Ice Age. Mm-hmm. And what made us beat all the other hominids, because the Ice Age was a hominid wiper. It was going to wipe out all of the hominids, including us. But we evolved to cooperate. And so that's what made us outclass all the other hominids, was because the other hominids were smart. Because he was saying that he was like if you look at Neanderthalis, Homo neanderthalis, which is Neanderthals, right? They have bigger brains, bigger bodies. They were stronger and faster than us, and they knew how to hunt. They had weapons, they knew how to hunt, and they were better at it. And he's like, so this whole theory that we outclass the other hominids can't work if you apply Darwinistic logic to it, because they were better. And they were better in all ways. They had like 300 cc's more brain than we do.
That's not necessarily, I mean, dolphins have more brain than we do, but it's
density. Dolphins' density is not as big as ours. And what he was saying was, there's no evidence that other primates have less density than us. And that's the thing. All the primates have the same amount of density. So size does matter.
Did it say that all primates do have the same density, or there was just no proof that
we have all the same density? A chimpanzee's brain is the same density as a human's brain. So the fact that the chimpanzee's brain is smaller means that it has less processing power.
So you could correlate that, but you couldn't definitively prove it without a Neanderthal's brain to actually go.
Right. And there's a lot of it that's, well, maybe, but but what he was saying was that, presuming right now, based on the creatures that are on this planet, the larger brained creatures tend to have less density. But they're also not in our tree. And that was his big thing was, though that's true, they're also not in our tree at all. All the creatures that are in our tree have the same density and different sized brains, which gives correlation to intelligence. So moving through that logic, because we of course have never captured a Neanderthal brain, moving through that logic, it's all right. Moving through that logic, he says, if you presume that logic, which you'd have to, but there's a lot of presumption in archaeology and anthropology anyway.
Right.
So moving through that logic, though, that means that in theory, Neanderthals had bigger brains and were smarter. He said, but the thing he says, if you look at humans relative to the other hominids, there are a few interesting traits that we have. He said, primarily, the biggest thing is we look like Neanderthal babies. If you look at the way the Neanderthals were versus us, we have no hair, we're smaller. The men look like women, the women look like babies, in hominids. He says, if you look at other creatures like cats and dogs, they are smaller than their wild counterparts. A dog is smaller than a wolf, and a cat is smaller than, say, a tiger. And they look cuter. They look like the kittens or the puppies of a wolf. A wolf cub looks like a dog. And a kitten looks like, or a tiger cub looks like a cat. So he said the domestication of animals makes them smaller. Once they domesticate, they become smaller. And he said that's probably designed so that you take care of them longer. And like cats have evolved to meow, which they don't do in real life. They only meow when they're kittens to get attention from their mom. But George gets in here and he meows at me all day long, right? Well, that's because I'm his mom. Right? You know, he's now evaluated that, but he's adjusted to a culture of which he treats everybody like mommy, and mommy takes care of him, which works. It worked for the kittens and the cats back in the day to domesticate them, because they would meow and the humans would feed them, and then they didn't have to do anything but catch the rats and the grain, and then their job was done, you know, and then they could have a warm home and everything like that. He was saying that the new theories that are coming out is that that's the advantage we had. We, instead of when Thug, the Neanderthal, invented fire, he would teach his wife or his mate and his children, but they were loners, so they wouldn't work together. He said the newer research is showing that the humans were in large groups. They were all, the sapiens were moving around in these groups. Even though they were by themselves, effectively, they were in groups of about 40. But each one of these 40 groups would get together and move across the country and get together in these huge gatherings of thousands. And there wasn't really an understanding of what they were doing in these groups of thousands until recently. And his theory is that even though Neanderthal could communicate, they weren't communicating vocally. They found that the vocal cords aren't the same in a Neanderthal. So that they weren't communicating like we were. So what he's saying is we domesticated ourselves. We became small and we started meowing at each other after infancy, which allowed us then ultimately to modulate that meow, and now we communicate by talking. And as soon as we could communicate by talking, I could invent fire, and rather than having to show you fire, I can now go and tell 50 people how to make fire. And that's a major advantage over having to show you how to make fire.
It makes a curious question for Neanderthals, because could it have been they had bigger brains because they didn't have the ability to vocalize?
That may have been also.
They had to be smart.
He wasn't necessarily saying that all he was saying was Darwin can't explain why. In fact, early archaeologists kind of invented the theory that we wiped out the other races by murdering them, because there's no logic behind it, because even the early anthropologists knew that the Neanderthal, by Darwin rules, should have won. And what he was saying was domestication overrides Darwinism. Because, and he was even commenting something that many people have observed. Darwinism is great, but according to Darwinism, my stepmom should never have had a child. She had cerebral palsy. She has cerebral palsy. According to Darwinism, we should have thrown her out in the snow and let her die. Instead, she grew up, had a family.
Darwinism doesn't describe that. Darwinism is purely like that the environment has an effect on a species, and it, through evolution, will either guarantee its survival or doom it, really, because it won't adapt, so it can't survive.
But I'm talking about survival of the fittest, which was his core argument after Galapagos Island.
Right. So I think that still speaks to everything we were even discussing with Neanderthal. Because it's an attribute of humans, of our cooperation. That's a skill or talent evolution gave us that wasn't given to Neanderthals.
Oh yeah.
That they did not survive. They were not the fittest for the environment. I don't think fitness in his description meant specifically like strength or intelligence. It was also like skills or other adaptations that make you fit for an environment. And our adaptation was our ability to cooperate.
Oh yeah. And I guess what I'm trying to say is his argument wasn't that this doesn't fit Darwinism. It was that the 1800s anthropologists were, rather than trying to make this theory work, they invented that we fought each other. And it was based on what you were just saying, which was chimpanzees will tear each other to shreds.
Mm-hmm.
And since they share 99% of our genes, the thought process was that we must have done the same thing to all the other hominids.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that it didn't help any that we've had a lot of theologians and philosophers like John Hobbes, who, pretty much say that our base belief or our base operation is evil. And he said, and religion plays a big part of that. Most religions on the planet, most of the prominent religions, are you're born into sin,
Right.
sort of structure in one way. And that, he said, there's no way you can not have that effect on people. You know what I mean? It will definitely have an effect on people.
I think that's where the bias comes in, is today and then, is that I think it would be a correct assumption to say that at our base we are primal, and a lot of people associate being primal is evil, right? We want to be evolved, we want to be intellectuals. That's good. So the opposite, therefore, being primal, being in that survival state is evil. But that doesn't have anything to do with it. I think it's safe to say that also that we oversimplify things today and then. I think most things are complex. So it's probably safe to say we did fight Neanderthals when they were a problem. We got along with them when things were fine. We probably interbred a lot. And then when the Ice Age came, the ones that couldn't intermingle with the humans probably didn't make it. And the ones that did intermingle with the humans probably interbred, eventually got old and died, but didn't interbreed with any other Neanderthals, so that line just died out.
Right. And so I am using terms and shortening this so that I can explain it. But I mean, I'm halfway through a 350-page book.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not, I'm using the wrong terminology, unfortunately. So let me, he's not making a case, because what you just said is exactly in line with what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
His case is on the primal function. We believe primal means that we act like chimpanzees and therefore tore each other apart. And
Right.
his argument was there's no standing proof that humans do that by default.
Mm-hmm.
He says every time you bring up a story of humans tearing each other apart, either archaeology is involved, or agriculture is involved, or it's post-agriculture universe,
Mm-hmm.
or it was a story where they didn't understand it because they were trying to make it fit Darwin's newest theory, and therefore they adjusted the story to fit the science, not the other way around. And he said, so once you reevaluate the core evidence, all core evidence shows that humans in their primal nature cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
So using your terms, that's exactly right. I mean, as opposed to when we're in our primal nature, we kill each other. The primal nature is that we cooperate with one another.
Right.
And he points out situations where the chips are down. Like, for example, 9/11. During 9/11, the people who were coming down the towers walked in an orderly single file line on the right side of the stairwell so that the left side was clear for the firefighters.
Right.
And they moved the injured people forward in the line so that they got out first. These were all people that knew they were dying,
Hmm.
and they did not run over each other. They did not crush each other. They did not hurt each other.
Well, I don't think it's safe to say they knew they were dying. I think it's safe to say they knew they were in danger.
Yeah,
But
well, yes, but I mean, they knew they were in danger. I guess they didn't know they were dying, but yes, they knew they were in danger. And oh, I don't need to take that. That's cool. So the thing that's fascinating about this is he brings up Hurricane Katrina as another good example of this. For Hurricane Katrina, there were all of these stories about looting and raping and murders. And what ended up happening was after everything had settled, none of that happened. The looting happened. But he was saying the funny thing about the looting was 9 times out of 10, it also involved the National Guard looting. So he was like, the authorities were the ones that were looting too. So he was like, that's kind of weird.
I don't think so. If we're judging humanity, your position, your state in life doesn't change, right? You're still human. You're still going to act
right
the same way.
And Donald's bringing up the San Francisco earthquake as well, which is a good point as well. But you can remain civil here, Donald. It's fine. But I mean, the thing that's what he was saying was that every time the worst things happen, we actually do very cooperative, nice things to one another. And he's like, the evidence routinely, over and over and over, shows that we are, by default, good people doing the right things. He points out The Lord of the Flies, which was written in 1956. The Lord of the Flies
is story, by the way, based off of a true story, actually. I mean, highly manipulated to fit a narrative, but it's actually based off of a true story. But
that's the thing. He researched the true story.
Do
you know what he found?
Go ahead. I already know the story, but go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, actually, the problem is the true story happened in 1966. It did not happen before that. The guy who wrote The Lord of the Flies, it's based off of him walking downstairs one day and saying, I wonder what would happen if we had a whole bunch of boys stuck on an island. They'd probably revert to their primal nature, wouldn't they? And then they'd kill each other, wouldn't they? And that's literally where it comes from. The actual The Fly story, which has gotten mixed into it because of the time, happened in 1966. So that was 10 years later after the book was published. And it was a bunch of people from Tonga, a bunch of boys from Tonga. They were in a parochial school. They were in an English parochial school. And they got bored. And bored boys are kind of a problem. So anyway, they got bored and decided to steal a boat. And so they did. They stole a fishing boat. And then, not knowing how to sail, they all went to sleep that night. And a storm took up the boat and tore its sails off and tore its rudder off. And then the boat ended up crashing on this abandoned island. And 15 months later, a lobster trawler came along, and one of these boys jumps into the water. And he's like, it was just this like naked boy with long hair. He jumps into the water, swims out to the boat, and goes, "Hi, my name is John Smith, whatever. And we've been stranded here for a long time. Can you help us?" In perfect English, which he was like, okay. And he gets there and finds that all 6 of them are healthy. They're all strong. They've got a little farm. They've got little buildings. They even had a little gym for weights, so they could lift weights. And they'd been there for 15 months. And they said whenever they had a conflict, they'd send the 2 boys that had a conflict to each side of the island for 2 hours, and then bring them back and force them to apologize. And that was the way it worked. And they had this total equitarian society. They were working together. One of the kids had fallen off of the cliff at one point in time and broke his leg. So he became king for 3 months. They set his leg, and then he became king and could tell them anything and tell them what to do. And it was like this adorable like world that they lived in. And they wanted to go back home because, they'd gotten over it. They were over this. But yeah, the real life Lord of the Flies didn't happen like that.
No.
Nobody killed each other. They, in fact, had a completely operable justice system going. They had a farm. They didn't even know how to farm. These boys were schoolboys, 13 through 16. I mean, they knew whatever they read in stories and books. So at least they had the core literature you'd have in junior high or high school.
Right.
But they were perfectly content, and they were fine, and they ran just fine. And they're still friends today. Apparently, all of them are scattered around. They all work the guy's lobster thing. So he's got like this company where he catches lobster, and he's out of New Zealand, which is where they were trying to go in the first place.
Right.
Because they were tired of Tonga, so they were gonna steal a boat and go to New Zealand and get a job and stuff. And so that was the original plan. So he first had to spring him out of jail, though. So he tried to make a movie, get the movie rights and stuff like that for it, and make a movie and stuff like that. So there's actual footage of where they were with the boys explaining their story, but nobody wanted it because nobody killed each other.
Right.
So it wasn't sensational enough. So instead, they just let it died in obscurity, but at least that got the boys out of jail.
Right.
Jail for stealing the boat.
Right.
But that's the thing he was pointing out was Lord of the Flies. It was always said Lord of the Flies was based on a real story. Well, he couldn't find any evidence of the author saying it was based off of a real story. What he found was people referring to this incident in Tonga as the incident that sparked it later in the 70s when Lord of the Flies started to become popular again. There was a resurgence of it, the story in the 70s, and people knew in the Zeitgeist that this had occurred. And so they had put two and two together. He said, but the author never said it was based on a real story. The author said it was based on him walking downstairs and sitting down with his wife and saying, I wonder what would happen if we had a bunch of boys. So it's like, yeah, see, like, that's the thing is like Donald, it's like they were the same thing. He's talking about him fighting with his brother and the teacher making them hug each other. And so that's the punishment. It's adorable, but effective, right? It works. And so, but that's the whole thing he was commenting on. That's what he was saying was that every time he found it, because he went looking for it. His whole theory, because he's a scientist, his theory was that we cooperate. So every time he found a story where we didn't cooperate, he went to go research it. And he went to the source of it. And he said it took him forever to find the source of the story, because in 67 or 68, after this happened, the guy tried to make a movie and nobody really wanted to do it. To make matters worse, the island that they were on is so uninhabitable. It's such a drastic island that getting movie crews up there in the 60s was really hard.
Right.
Really hard. And so the movie crews didn't want to do it. It was just too much effort. So they got one movie crew up there, and that movie crew was like, look, dude, this is a violation of everything I do as a movie person, so I'm not doing it anymore. So it was particularly funny that that's the way that went down. But yeah, the thing that's fascinating about this story is he's like, I'm making the case. Here's the case. This book is all about the case. Here's my case for it. And I'm reading it and I'm going, like every time you have something where, the story says that we were horrible people, it was clearly something other than that.
Yeah. I think my problem with the conclusion is that the whole point of the process he's going through is to come to a singular conclusion. And I think what I see, at least in humanity, is that when dramatic events happen, at the end and in the average of the spectrum of activities that happen, yes, we become collective and we work together to solve a problem and things like that. But when you look at the spectrum of everything that's happened, there is a section of people that are going primal and doing bad things. There's a section of people doing really good things, and they're like, okay, we have to organize, and they're taking a leadership role when they may not normally do that, you know. And then there's a whole bunch of group of people that are willing to follow, even though maybe they're not normally followers, right? So there's a spectrum of things that are happening, but it's coming to that conclusion of like, okay, the bulk of everything happening here is we're cooperative, so that's the base state of humanity. When it's not, there's a spectrum of base behavior, and to say we're base evil or base good is to ignore the spectrum of activities that we end up doing.
Well, that's what his argument was. That's the argument he's making, is that his argument is based off of redoing research. So research that had been done with a bias. And so he's taking the bias out as much as possible, which of course, the thing about science is there's only so much you can do about bias, right? Like bias is implicit. So science is all about, I do the research, then you do the research again. And hopefully, if you prove me wrong, you've wiped out a little bit of bias, right? And then Donald redoes your research, and hopefully he's wiped out my bias and your bias. You know, so if there was 50% bias with me, you've brought it down to 25% bias. Donald brings it down to 15% bias. You get the idea. Then, you know, of course, Brent does the redoes the research, and so every time the experiment is brought forward, then somebody repeats the experiment, and if they get the same results, we're doing good. But they're also going to redo the research to ensure that my biases, and that's the important point. So what he's been doing in this book is showing each one of the other scientists' work that he is working on, and showing him redoing their research. So walking through the steps again, right? And it's one of those things that it's hard if you've never seen how science works. Right. Like if you've never had somebody in your family who is an actual scientist, it's a little harder, because the way that we look at that would be like, Bill built a PC, and then Guy tore the PC apart and put it back together again, right? How do you know I didn't do it wrong, right? Well, that's not the way this works. The way this works is, you know, I built a hypothesis. My hypothesis is this, and I came to this conclusion because of these 6 observations. Right. So you're going to go back through and look at all those observations again, and hopefully you come to the same conclusion. If you don't, then we've got something we need to look at as you and me as scientists, because if you and I aren't coming to the same conclusion, then we need to go look for more evidence.
Right.
And include that.
Hopefully for me, you proved me right. But in reality, it's hopefully we find a better conclusion, whether that's the same conclusion or another conclusion.
Right. The hope is that you will find the same conclusion. In the, like, for example, in the aspect of space, let's just say, you know, because there's some great conclusions that we've come to. This is why these are called theories, and this is why we have a constant problem in common culture, because a scientific theory is not the same thing as the way. Yeah, you're wrong, Bill. Says Brent. Sorry, caps lock. The scientific theory is not the same as the theory that we usually use, because it's a theory that gravity exists, you know? Right. Which, I mean, I wouldn't test that by going outside and trying to jump off your roof. You know?
It is at least a undisproven theory that gravity exists.
Right? I mean, like, technically speaking, it's a theory that gravity exists. So you kind of have to go, well, you know. Anyway, but this is like even so, that's what happens when people are like, the theory of evolution is just a theory. Well, it is a theory, yes, but we're at like 99% on that.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to stay a theory perpetually because technically, by the laws of science, it can never reach 100% ever. It's like gravity. I can prove to you that dropping a ball from here will land on this table, but it's still a theory.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's still that 0.00001% chance it won't.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though you and I are pretty sure that that's
Mm-hmm.
going to go down, it still has to be held as a theory. Anyway, so a lot of this fascinating stuff that I've been reading is because do I want to do this, or do I want smaller windows? I might want smaller windows. Maybe I want smaller windows. Sorry. I'm trying to build the coffee shop here because we need a Starbucks coffee. I like Starbucks too. That was almost as good.
So going back, I was just even thinking about it, that I'm not going to say it's proof of anything, but I feel like we almost subconsciously reflect the reality of humanity in our stories.
Yes.
Because if you look at a lot of even sci-fi stories, there's always X thing happens and people need to react. There's always the character that is selfish and overreacts and tries to save themselves, usually dies. There's the character that's like, I'm going to be uber authoritarian, and I'm going to make all the decisions. They usually die. And it's always the character that's like the most cooperative and friendly with everyone, and he ends up reluctantly, kind of taking charge, and he ends up getting everyone out, right? So like that's the spectrum of how, as humans, we react to situations, right?
Yeah, I mean, and what I think the argument he's trying to make, is that the guy who's selfish is not default for humans. That's a modification brought about by.
I think there's a range that's a default for human. I think that's the problem. Maybe the language that's being used, not by you, but probably by him, but that there's a specific default. I don't think there's a specific default.
Yeah, well, and though I agree, I think part of all of this is that he's saying, he's not saying that they don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
What he's saying is that that's not what made us beat the other hominids.
Mm-hmm.
There's no proof that we warred with the other hominids. There's definitely proof that we had sex with the other hominids.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no proof that we killed the other hominids.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. Like the Neanderthal there's no skeletons of Neanderthal, and now we have many of them. There are no skeletons of the Neanderthal that come up with war wounds from human weapons.
Mm-hmm.
There are war wounds from Neanderthal weapons, but those were different weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And now that the anthropology is starting to work, it's clear that Neanderthal had different types of weapons because they were larger creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So their weapons were different than ours. And there's no proof of humans hurting Neanderthal.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely proof that we had sex with them, but there's no proof that we hurt them. And what he was saying was, if you think about it from the way the domestication of other animals goes, cats and dogs became domesticated because we gave them a warm place to stay.
Right.
And that's definitely an advantage.
And they didn't try to eat us.
And so, that's certainly an advantageous. And so the whole point was that in doing so, we domesticated ourselves in the same manner. And he says that, part of the problem is that people don't like to go with that logic, because when they do, they have to admit that we're not in control. And he says there's been a lot of, he calls it the caveman thesis. There's a lot of people who really, really desperately want us to be smarter and better than Oog the caveman. And therefore, we are an evolved species from the caveman. And he says that colors this, and it came from the Neanderthal. discoveries in the 1800s. You know, the idea being that the preference is we desperately as a culture want to think that we were smarter than cavemen because cavemen were dumb and didn't have cars. And therefore, we are obviously the evolutionary product of. And he's like, there's nothing in this theory that contradicts that, except that there was no intelligence to our evolution to become better hominids. We just happened to luck out and do the right thing to become better hominids. And that's all. He says, but people have a hard time with that because they really want us to have done something to become the better hominids. And he's like, well, and though that's plausible, he says that the evidence just doesn't pan that out. And the evidence is just showing that what we did, overlay that works, because we're going to put something in the background there. The evidence is showing that the evidence is showing that we as a culture actually banded together and lodged everybody in huge lodges and huddled together for warmth, which is something that the other Neanderthal isn't showing up. All the other hominids show that their family groups stayed together, but they didn't group their friend groups with their family groups.
Right.
And so when they find encampments of Neanderthal, it's always usually just the family group. You know, there's a male or two males and a female or two females and a number of children as the family group. So the other hominids didn't group together like we do. I mean, and it pans out even today. You're my family, but you're not related to me at all, not genetically, but I have adopted you. You know, you are as much my family as my family. You know, you mean a lot to me. Pepper means a lot to me. Donald means a lot to me. Jerry means a lot to me. You know what I mean? Like, you're my family. I've chosen this group.
Yeah.
And that's a different thing that what he was saying was that function is what gave us the evolutionary advantage. That function. And he said, and so we don't, by nature, we're not the kind of people to do destructive things because that's against that core belief. He says what happens is and he goes through all of these. Hobbes had a theory that we are tribal, and he said that the tribal theory is true, except only when resources are involved. We only become tribal over resources. As long as there's no resource problem, and as long as we can, Brent's not in my family. I'm just saying, everybody here is in my family, but Brent. Look at you, Brent. Look at you. But I mean, like, but he was saying that Brent's like, that's fine, rage quit. But what he was saying was the tribal stuff only comes out when we have resource problems. So all of this is to come back to say, I've removed the resource problems from our humans. In Matrix Rising, we don't have resource problems. So, presuming that this guy is correct, and I actually, following his science, I can see where he's going with this. I'm of the opinion that as long as we don't have resource problems, we're fine. We operate.
I would add that resource problems is huge, but then as humans, we're funny. We like to find new problems and things. So, like, culture can be a division. You know, identity can be a division. We start to, when we don't have these other problems, we start to invent new problems, if you will, and add them. So, like, you know, like religion is a divider for some people.
Sure.
What else? Star Wars and Star Trek. You know, Star Trek and Star Wars people don't necessarily like each other sometimes.
Right. I will argue, though, that religion also is a resource issue.
Hmm.
Um,
There's not enough gossip to go around.
well, that religion's original mission was to um, give us a support structure for um, for right. Well, that's and Donald he brought that up specifically. The Superdome, 20,000 people with no power and
Mhm.
no air conditioning in the middle of Louisiana in August or whatever. So that was unpleasant. And he said there were stories about people murdering infants and things like that in there, and what they found out was 2 children died of heat exposure, but that was it.
Mhm.
Everybody else worked really hard to try to
Mhm.
keep everybody balanced, and they lost 2, but they were all devastated by losing those 2. Like everybody was upset. Like they could
So,
not stop it,
right.
and they tried.
So,
So
so that's a matter of, and that's awesome. But that's a matter of priorities, right? At that moment, it was most important of everyone's values and culture to come together. But when everything else is great, like resources are plentiful, I'm suggesting that as human beings, we start to say when there is nothing of higher priority, that we start to nitpick ourselves and start to unnecessarily divide ourselves.
So Donald saying there was rape and murder, and you talked to people that were there. This author literally went through and tried to find proof of it, and he couldn't. So if there was rape and murder, nobody actually has record of it. No official. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but there were no bodies sent to the morgues because he went through all of it. The only people who were actually killed during Hurricane Katrina, according to the authorities, which the authorities, right? So I grant a nod to the fact that the authorities are the authorities. Um, the only people who were killed were by the National Guard, who actually shot people that they thought were looting gangs, but weren't sure. So those are the only people that I don't know. There were stories. That's the thing he said. He said there were lots of stories that came out of the Superdome about all kinds of atrocities. He said, but the only bodies that went to the morgue from the Superdome, um, the only bodies that went to the morgue were those 2 children, and they were heat exhaustion by the coroner. So he was saying that that's the thing is we have a thing in our culture where we like to sensationalize. And sometimes the sensationalism runs out of control and becomes bizarre. Um, and so I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm certainly not going to say you're wrong. But he did not just leave it with all I heard was X. So that's the problem. The problem he's got, his argument is, and this is an interesting point, is you end up with sort of, he says that there's a 3-step process to this. So, person A is in a bad situation, hears something in the bad situation about something that happens just over the way. That propagates, gets to the news propagates it. Then somebody else, like a research scientist, will say it didn't happen. Then the conspiracy theory starts. Well, it did, but we're all hiding it. And he's like, that's fine, but show me proof. Show me proof that it's been hidden. Well, you can't find proof because it's hidden, right? The problem is that is a logical place where a lot of humans go to believe things that are hard to believe. And he's not saying you're wrong, but what he's saying is that's actually a function. We do that as humans. He says like Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about this. Dr. Tyson talks about this a lot. We're in an age where literally every human being has a camera. And yet, the only pictures we have of UFOs are fuzzy Navy footage, right?
Mhm.
Every human being on the planet has a camera. But we still have never seen that. Nobody's got a picture of a Bigfoot that's not fuzzy and blurry. You know what I mean? His whole thing is, now that every human being has the ability to record, we don't have footage of UFOs that aren't blurry and fuzzy. And he's like, so it's not that, because his theory is the same as mine. I don't believe that there are no aliens. That's not where I'm going.
Well, Guy, they have AI on our phones that delete photos that we shouldn't have. Don't you know this?
Right? Exactly. Well, yeah, but see, that's a great example, Donald. The historians are conflicting the government's story.
Mhm.
The historians at Wounded Knee, right? Dice throwing adventures. See you later, Jerry. The historians at Wounded Knee. That's actually a very valid point, because the historians have now very clearly proven that the FBI was in the wrong. The FBI was absolutely in the wrong. And the historians, because they don't have an interest in proving the natives at Wounded Knee or proving that the FBI, they don't have a vested interest in this. They just want the right story. And over 3 or 4 evolutions of that story, of them going back and getting information, collecting evidence from the scene, eyewitness accounts, photographs, they've gone through and pieced together a much more clear narrative of what happened at Wounded Knee. The government, however, is not backing down. So the government won't back down on that one. That's why Leonard Peltier is still in jail, weirdly. And that's still something that makes me, as someone who backs Native American culture, that's one of my other cultures, home cultures, if you will. Leonard Peltier is still a problem child for me. But yeah, but that's actually a very important statement. And what happens is with that one, that does nothing more than fuel the distrust of the government.
Mhm.
Because the government's not backing down. They're not backing down for a different reason now. They're not backing down because we don't actually do double jeopardy in our government. This is something you and I were talking about last night, Bill.
Mhm.
Because we were like, you should revisit, right? Because they should be revisiting, but they won't, because it's double jeopardy. And so they won't do it. And the truth of the matter is, now nobody who was actually in the original prosecution of the people at Wounded Knee, none of those people are alive anymore. So at this point in time, there's no real need for like my generation or the younger generations to hold to this. It's not like they're going to find that they are personally responsible. So they could revisit it, they just won't.
Mhm.
Yep. Oh yeah. Wounded Knee was a thing. Wounded Knee was a thing, Donald. You and I were both on the same wavelength. Wounded Knee was a thing.
Mhm.
They did it again with where was that, in North Dakota, where the XL pipeline was going through, and it had sprung a leak and polluted the river in a native encampment. And they made the natives were protesting, so they turned off the oil, and they wouldn't let the people get in there and repair the pipeline. They wanted the pipeline rerouted around their area. And the police did it again. They went in there and marched in there and shot them with water cannons and all kinds of stuff. Get them to move out. Typical complicated things that go on in the world. Anyway, I agree with what you were saying in principle with a lot of things. I think, though, one of the things that's fascinating about his arguments on this are that one of the things that's fascinating about his arguments on this.
Would it be more interesting if you went more asymmetric and maybe put it up in like the right-hand corner and had some
like this?
Not so close to the right-hand, or not so close to the corner, but
it
and then put some kind of thing like, the union's best copy since 3068 or something like that.
Oh yeah, this is for Springs, so it's not a union thing. Or unity thing.
I mean, whatever statement that they might make.
I think it's skewed. Yeah. It needs to be in reverse because it's the outside of the window. Inside. Yeah, the reservation got their water from there. That was part of the problem that was going on. So the reservation was getting their water from that, which was way uncool.
One of the many instances of the government and the will of the many outweighs the will of the few.
Yes, the will of the oil companies.
Well, we see that we all use oil, right? So is it really the oil company or is it us? Because we're paying them, right?
Plausible.
Not as much anymore, but.
I mean, that's entirely plausible. I mean, I don't know. I mean, in this instance, it's one of those. And that brings us back full circle.
Mm-hmm.
So what becomes, you've built your company in the dome, but your widgets damage the dome. But everybody needs your widgets. What do you do?
Right.
That brings us back to where we were, which is is the will of the people important enough to override, in that instance.
I think there's a moral argument there, and I think the will of the many seems to often win in the end to the detriment of the many, many times.
Yeah, I mean, there comes that's the reason behind democracy. I mean, that's what democracy is. You, me, and Pepper vote, and if two people vote for pizza and one person votes for hamburgers, we go for pizza.
Right.
'Tis the nature of the beast. That's just
which is why, in general, democracy isn't always great. It's one of the arguments against it is like it's two wolves and a whatever prey deciding what's for lunch. It's like prey loses, right?
Right. But I mean, I'm of the don't ever do that again. Okay, that whatever you just did, don't do that again. I'm of the opinion, though, that democracy is the only way that we as a culture. Oh, hey, Kevin's here. That means it's about time for me to head off and do my thing. So I didn't manage to get this comic done. But it does mean that there has to be a pull to one side or the other. The will of the many. I mean, like we don't even, and we can go into this one tonight, tomorrow, some other time. We don't have to do this now because I don't think we have time. But I mean, the will of the many is part of the reason why the political left right now is upset with the yes, I know, I heard him. The Electoral College, right? Because the will of the many it says that we went one person, and the will of the Electoral College says we went the other person. And that causes strife in the system because it causes the left political left right now to lose faith in the system.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing. It's, the system is more complicated than most people understand,
Right.
So anyway, yes, we end our show, as you might imagine, with a Star Trek quote, which is, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Mhm.
More than one. Yeah. And Bill, I have been and always shall be your friend. Live long and prosper. Thank you for joining me, Bill. I really appreciate talking to you. I feel like I pretty much talked at you the entire day. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I really enjoy hearing what you're saying, and I'm taking what we were talking about last night and evolving it.
Mhm.
I'm not ready to implement anything, so I will continue to talk to you before I'm ready to put it to paper. So don't worry, you've got more time to talk it out.
All right, good.
So because I really liked what you said last night, and I liked what Mariah said to counterpoint it.
Mhm.
And I kind of want to throw that back at you and say, what do we do then? And you came with another option, and I thought, that's also fascinating.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, and we got to the point where I was asking the next question, which is, thinking about the world where we've got a dome
Mhm.
and you're making widgets and your widget puts out toxic gas, let's say, who's responsible for that?
Right.
Where does the responsibility lie? On you as the company or on me as the people?
Mhm.
And I think that's where we have to figure out then, how do you rectify that? So let's ponder that, you and me, and then the next time we're on, see if you've got a good solid answer for that, because I love the way you think.
Sounds good.
So, and I'll put that to the duck pond too. If you guys have an idea on that one too, I'm open. So understand though that I am very much believing this guy's theories on things, and I love his theories on things, and so I'm very much into them. So knowing that I'm going to go from the default is that everybody wants to do the best that they can. So what's the best thought process? So I have an extended version of this too, and I'm wondering whether this book's going to get around to it. My theory on why people do what they do. I'm wondering if he's going to get around to it. Anyway, thank you for being here, Donald. Thank you for being here, Brent. Thank you for being here, Jerry. I think that's who we had here. I don't think we had anybody else at this time. We had Jerry, we had Donald, we had Brent. I see Jerry and Brent and Donald and Brent and Jerry. I see two versions of Brent going back. All right, sweet. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you again, Bill. I really, really appreciate you. And as always, remember to keep your eyes on the stars. Goodbye.